All right, hello everyone. We are going to get started in just a moment as folks are joining right now, and we're admitting everyone, but thank you for being here. We will get going in just a minute. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Hey everyone, thank you so much for being here. My name is Michael Sewell, and I work with Alderman Matt Martin in the 47th Ward office. We're just excited to welcome you to this Northside Environment Town Hall. We've got a really nice lineup today with the Illinois Environmental Council, the Center for Neighborhood Technology, and many elected officials you can see pictured at the bottom of the screen here. It's a really interesting, challenging time right now. But what we're going to do today is talk through what the current crisis means for how we can perhaps address the climate emergency later, hear a little bit about how government has reacted in this crisis response, how COVID has affected the operations of government in terms of the day-to-day, and then also how we can come together and move forward, as we'll hear from not only our elected officials, but IEC and CNT. And then we'll also talk a little bit about some groups that are organizing at a very local level. So the Edgewater Environmental Sustainability Project and the 47th Ward Green Council will share a little bit about how you can get involved with working on some of these initiatives here. So I'm really excited that we got this meeting in just before the end of April, because we've had a Green Council meeting every month dating back to last summer since we got into office. And I think the last meeting that the Green Council had was featuring the group Organizing for Plastics Alternatives, and that was on March 10th, just before things really started to ramp up here with the pandemic, and we started to see the stay-at-home orders go into place. So it's really great to see a lot of familiar names joining in the call today. And I think we're going to kick things off the way that we do with every 47th Ward Green Council meeting, which is something that really I think keeps us grounded in understanding the moment that we're in and what it is that we want to tackle as a group, both locally, but also citywide and of course globally. And that is reading a climate emergency declaration, which the 47th Ward Green Council organized to essentially state that declaration, and then asked Alderman Martin to do so through the City Council, which we worked on in partnership. So I'm going to introduce you to one of our fabulous 47th Ward Green Council leaders, Jules Peterson, who is here. And I really thank Jules for being here and really leading the charge on that climate emergency declaration. So we will start things with that. Jules, take it away.
Jules, you're muted. All right, well, we're working through maybe a little bit of technical difficulties here. Wouldn't it be a Zoom town hall without that? Maybe we'll jump to Alderman Martin to kick us off here.
That's great. Can you hear me okay? Great. So Alderman Martin here. Wanted to, again, thank everybody from the Green Council, as well as folks who aren't in the 47th Ward Green Council, who helped make that climate declaration possible. I think that was a really critical first step that this new city council could take, because it sets the stage for the sorts of things that we need to be doing to help make sure that we're taking the appropriate steps when we declare a climate emergency and we say we're not going to cheapen a huge significant problem with mere rhetoric, we've got policies in place. And so that's where groups like the 47th Ward Green Council are so critical, because we're already working to identify those next steps. So it's things like making sure that we're holding hearings on improving our dismal recycling and composting rates, that we're expanding our tree canopy, knowing how, and I'm sure a lot of folks have seen this on their streets the last several days of all this rain. You've seen what's happened when we have a much less porous environment. The need to continue reducing emissions. So Alderman Riley and I got an ordinance passed that will improve the electrical vehicle charging infrastructure in new buildings, but there's so much more work to be done when it comes to electrifying our bus fleets, as well as having a modified building code that takes green features into account and really is a point of prominence. And then finally, more complicated issues like having the new ComEd franchise agreement be something that really reflects the 21st century in terms of our environmental needs. The last time we brought this into, or we re-upped that franchise agreement was about 30 years ago. And then lastly, reinstituting the Department of the Environment, because with so many moving parts that we're going to be talking about today, we need to make sure at the city level that we've got a point person as well as a point organization within government that are going to help us do that. So those are some of the things that I'm really excited to work with the Green Council as well as everybody on this call towards putting online from a city council standpoint. So I'll stop right there and then kick it over to Alderman Vasquez, who I know has more to say about the sort of stuff we need to be doing more on city council.
Thanks so much, Alderman Martin. Looks like we don't have Alderman Vasquez on yet. So let's kick it over to Representative Ann Williams, another 47th Ward resident who's fighting the good.
Great.
Okay, great. I think I'm unmuted and visible. I am. Okay. So my name is Ann Williams and I represent much of the 47th Ward. I want to take a minute to thank all the members of the 47th Ward Green Council, some of whom have been active on environmental issues for decades, and so grateful for your leadership, especially during this challenging time. You probably have heard of the Clean Energy Jobs Act. It's an expansive bill designed to combat the impacts of the climate crisis and create jobs in all communities. But with the pandemic, like everything, that particular piece of legislation is temporarily on hold as we work to address the very critical triage needs of managing a pandemic of this magnitude. However, it has never been more clear that the health of our planet is absolutely intertwined with the health of its population. Just recently, I was looking up some articles that dealt with the link between infectious disease and climate change. And sure enough, on the World Health Organization's website, they have one paper on it and many more resources you can review. There's quite simply unequivocal evidence that infectious disease is increasing and the incidence of infectious disease are increasing. And in large part, it is because of environmental factors, everything from urbanization, poor urban planning, deforestation, ocean warming, changes in precipitation, the list goes on and on. Certainly these items impact the development of these diseases and the spread of these diseases. Another thing that I think is a lesson that we can learn from this incredibly challenging time as pertains to the issue of climate change in our environment is that we need to listen to science and data. And we don't just need to listen to science and data because it's a good idea overall for our future. It's really become a means of avoiding catastrophe. We have ignored for years the warnings that now seem so obviously clear that a pandemic was a possibility. None of us probably could envision that the movie Contagion or whatever the Outbreak or whatever those movies are, we could be living one day. And sure enough, here we are. We have likewise been warned about the devastating impacts of climate change for years now, and the warnings have become louder and louder. And yet many globally and more locally even just don't pay attention to those very dire warnings. I think that this is a really hard and very brutal lesson that we're learning right now about what happens when we disregard science and data. So I'm hopeful that we will learn from this and actually take the steps necessary to start pushing back on some of the climate crisis. We don't even really need to listen to warnings. We can see the impacts happening, whether it's the wildfires in Australia or our own lake levels. We're dealing already with the impacts of climate change, and there's 1,000 more examples. There is good news, though. I don't want to be all doom and gloom. It's hard to avoid at times, but since the pandemic, we've seen unintentionally some positive impacts to the climate. I'm sure you've all noticed on social media the depictions of satellite imagery, which show mountain ranges being visible in parts of the world that were never visible for years because of the smog and pollution. I think the stats are somewhere between 25% and 30% carbon emissions down in certain parts of the globe when the economy was shut down. And that really is quite telling. I just like to think about, what if we were seeing these impacts, not because of a devastating global pandemic, but because we made deliberate, forward-thinking, decisive policy decisions to address climate change and save the health of our planet and its inhabitants. I do feel positive. I'm an optimist and very excited to have these conversations on a very micro level. Of course, we'd like to see global leadership. Just like the pandemic, it's a global problem. Climate needs to be addressed on a global level. At the very least, we need to have some action, decisive and clear on the federal level. Instead, we've seen further trashing of our environment and the mockery really of environmental advocacy. But I'm hopeful that will change in the not too distant future, and that we can on this call work collaboratively to support leaders at all levels of government and really make the changes we need to address climate change, eliminate carbon emissions, move to renewables, and create jobs along the way, which will be an important part of our economic recovery. So on that note, I wanted to again thank the organizers for including me tonight and turn it over to one of my colleagues who serves on the Cook County Board of Commissioners, Bridget Degnen, who has been an amazing leader when it comes to the environment. So Bridget, take it away.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much, Anne, for your leadership on the environment and for CEJA and all that you do in the General Assembly. I also wanted to thank all the organizers of this meeting for assembling all of us here to talk about some of the work that we've already completed and performed and some of the things that we have in the hopper. So before I became an Cook County Commissioner, I was a Peace Corps volunteer. After that, I was an environmental engineer, and then I was an environmental attorney, filing suit against some polluters in Illinois at the Attorney General's office. So the environment is one of the major priorities of what I want to perform serving you on the Cook County Board. Part of my district includes the 40th wards and the 47th ward. My district includes 14 different wards of Chicago. So a lot of the work that we're looking to do will affect people on this call. So I wanted to just kind of discuss 5 quick items. The first is that we passed an environmental commission ordinance at Cook County. We have a bunch of people on that commission now with environmental knowledge, experience, and backgrounds who have committed through their different sectors to support green initiatives. So what we just passed in March was that we would work on large facility industrial composting projects. So at the jail, at hospitals, and larger arenas, we would coordinate with them to instill industrial composting, similar to the way the museum campus has very successfully incorporated that with the public to make sure that industrial composting it works very well there, and there's no reason that we can't push those initiatives out to ensure that we're getting that done at larger scale facilities where there's a lot of food waste. The second thing that we did is started to work with some of our aldermen on changing the weed ordinance in Chicago to ensure that people that want to have native plantings and native gardens were allowed to do that, and that they wouldn't be fined by the city of Chicago, in order to encourage less water and watering lawns and more native plants to encourage different types of butterflies and other insect proliferation in Chicago. And the third initiative was a larger tree planting initiative that would cover all areas of Chicago, but really participate more grandly on the south and west sides, where they have about 70% fewer trees than we do up in the north side. The second thing that we did was on our budget in 2020, we swept some of the money from the Department of the Environment that was sitting in just an account that wasn't doing anything. And we're pushing that money, hopefully in May, through a budget resolution to incorporate solar panels on schools. So there is a foundation in Illinois that supports funding for solar panels on schools. And these funds from the county would backstop the last 10% that the school would need to raise in order to incorporate an environmental curriculum at schools, so kids could learn about the environment, about solar panels, the data that's captured by those panels, and reduce energy costs. So that's a really exciting thing that we're planning to roll out in May. And taking a cue from our friends in the 47th Ward Green Council and Alderman Matt Martin's good work, we have drafted a climate emergency that looks a lot like the city's climate emergency, and we plan to roll that out in May or June, depending on what the rest of the agenda looks like. You know, because there's a pandemic, we were at our last board meeting in April really trying to focus what our resolutions and our ordinances were, to make them very narrow. So hopefully we will be passing those things in March or in May and June. So that's very exciting. One of the things that we can naturally do as elected officials is really look through an environmental lens at all the contracts that we have. So all the money that we're spending, whether it's on our vehicle fleet, whether it's on plastic utensils at the jail or juvenile detention center, whatever we're looking at, however we're spending money, we are pushing these initiatives to make sure that if there's plastic utensils this year, that next year we're not getting that contract, and instead we're getting a contract for reusable metal utensils, things that would have a lesser environmental impact. And so our office has become known as the one that's asking questions about where's our money going, how are we spending that money, and are we making sure that that money is best used in a way that's most environmentally friendly. So we've really started to coordinate on just a general recycling program to make sure all of our paper is recycled. It seems like it would be very basic and easy, but it's not always working out that way. So we're kind of starting at the bottom, getting the lowest hanging fruit, and then we'll work our way north. One of the things that we focused on also in the second ward with Brian Hopkins is addressing general iron and that environmental issue that's going on there. There's a lot of work still to be done, but I think his leadership has been very solid in connection with that. It's a difficult problem, but we are moving forward on that. So I really encourage everybody in this call to contact our office at District 12 at cookcountyil.gov. If you have any thoughts or recommendations about what you'd like us to see, what you'd like us to do to support the environment. So we've got some good ideas, but the more heads that collaborate and get together, the more we can get done. And so that's really what we're all about. So we're very excited to do that. I'd like to next introduce our Metropolitan Water Reclamation District Commissioner, Kim Bouquet. Bouquet, sorry, Kim. And she'll talk about all the good work she's doing there. Thank you.
Hi. Technical difficulties. Hope you all can hear me. I also want to thank you all for having me today. You know what, a great opportunity to let everyone know what we've been working on. So first I'll start like I always do by just taking 30 seconds to remind everyone, which I think you all know exactly what the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District does. We are responsible for managing your wastewater, for protecting our precious freshwater supply, which is Lake Michigan, and helping to mitigate flooding. So to that end, with this pandemic, now it's mandatory for us to wear masks, and many of us are wearing gloves. And as you know, when I go out, I see these gloves and these masks being disposed of in the streets. And so one of the messages that I want to convey to you all today is when you are disposing of your gloves and your masks, to please take the time to dispose of them properly in the trash can. Because at the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District, when we are processing wastewater and stormwater or anything that goes down the drain, we are getting those gloves and those masks are coming into our system, and they're clogging up our pipes. And as a result, rainwater and floodwater might end up in your basement. So I know that we've all taken significant steps in our daily lives to clean and sanitize and make sure that we are trying to stay COVID-free and corona-free. We just have to make sure that when we're using those disinfectant wipes and those gloves and those masks, that they are disposed of properly. And I also should mention that we should not be disposing of those items in the recyclable bins. And I know it's counterintuitive not to dispose of not to try and recycle a plastic product such as the plastic gloves that some of us wear, but those are actual medical waste, and they have to go into the trash can and be disposed of properly. And the wipes that some of us use, the disinfectant wipes, they are not flushable and they are not biodegradable. So we have to make sure that we dispose of those properly. Even if they're labeled as flushable, they can clog our pipes and damage our systems. So that's the first thing. I also want to mention that the only thing that should be going into our toilets and down our drains or toilet paper or anything that comes out of your body. So again, let's be cautious with that. And back to climate change, in 2019, Cook County recorded another record rainfall with close to 50 inches of rain falling. That's more than a foot above the average rainfall for our region, and only about an inch more shy of the all-time record. And these records have been kept since 1871, and 4 of the 5 wettest years in Cook County have occurred in this last decade. And part of the reason it's been so wet is because of climate change and global warming. 2019 was the second warmest year on record after 2016. And so for every degree of warming, according to a recent article in the Tribune, the atmosphere absorbs 4% more water vapor. And the more water vapor that's in the atmosphere means more rainfalls, often more intense and often more severe. So all of that works together, and we have to continue to work to mitigate climate change and to all work together to make sure that our earth and our environment stays healthy. And then the last thing I like to say is when we start to have these huge rain events, we need to ensure that we do not add more water into the system. So that means don't run your washing machine, try not to run your dishwasher, don't take a long shower, because when you do those things, you're adding more water into the system and more water into our sewers, and it can overwhelm our systems. And once again, that water can end up backed up into our basements. Because as you all know, we have built huge water reservoirs and tunnels to collect and absorb that excess water. But when we have these huge rainstorms and we're adding excess water to our reservoirs and to our tunnels, sometimes it gets overwhelmed, and we have what's called overflow action days. So once we get past this pandemic, there's lots of resources that the Water Reclamation District has. We offer free compost that's topping soil for your gardens. We offer the opportunity to give away rain barrels that you can raffle off at your community events. We also give away free tree saplings to plant in your backyards or in your gardens. And of course, we always have free educational material. And we're always willing to come out and speak to your groups about what you can do to help mitigate climate change, and how MWRD can partner with you and your community organizations to make this all better. I think that's all I have. Oh, I should say one other thing. I always forget, this is the most important thing. If you have any prescription medicines, please do not flush your prescription medicines down the toilet. We have drug take-back programs that we offer around the county. And once the pandemic ends, we'll continue those. But in the meantime, there are places around the county, as well as local drugstores, Walgreens and CVS, that will take your prescription medicines back. But please don't flush them down the toilet. And the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District is working on its first time ever climate action plan. And it's creating a plan for resiliency and sustainability. And that's something that I've initiated. So we look forward to continuing that work. So if you have any questions, please reach out to me at MWRD. Thank you.
All right, Alderman Vasquez, on to you to introduce all the efforts that you're doing before the city.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate that we have this platform to have a conversation about the environment. I think it's really challenging to think about like the things that we've done since we've taken office, especially in the moment that we're in. But something that we've been really focused on, or the first thing that really our office worked on had to do around a lot of the trees that were getting cut in the neighborhoods. So on the 5900 block of Hermitage, we had a morning where about 14 trees were being cut in the same block. And that led to us to do some research and figure out the nature as to why something like that would occur in a neighborhood. To find out that it really was the Department of Water Management that, in trying to do water main work, was typically determining what trees were getting cut. So as we started really looking into it and trying to figure out how to solve problems for our neighbors, what we identified is that there's technology out there that can keep keep the city departments from having to cut down trees. One's called cured in place piping. So rather than having to cut trees and the roots that would entangle in pipe, to figure out a way to like line it so it could last longer, because we're talking about like pipes that are 80 years or older. So we put forward.
I am picking up another call. I'm about to.
Oh, sorry. So then we put forth an ordinance that would kind of mandate a study to be able to get that done. And because there was enough people that were supporting, it was actually the first bill I put out there. We got about 30 something signatures on it. The mayor was able to put through an executive order 2 pilot programs that kind of solve that. So I think the way our office has been, it's really looking at what can we do legislatively to make things better for neighbors. And a lot of it is looking at, like, let's say our waste management vendors, there's a contract that'll be coming up that we want to look at, because right now Waste Management is the name of one of the companies that makes profit, whether they dump things in a landfill or do the recycling. So the profit incentive would lead them to just dump them in a hole. So I think we need to look at agreements like that. So a lot of what we've been focused on is appreciating like the larger messages and seeing what we can enact in city government that can help. So I would ask, the way we've always had, we have a volunteer legislative team. So if there are neighbors who are invested and want to figure out things that we could do at the city level, we invite them to come work with us to draft legislation and figure out how to move it forward.
Thank you so much, Alderman.
Thank you.
Great, and thanks everybody. I think I'm next here. I'm Jen Walling. I'm the Executive Director of the Illinois Environmental Council and a Northside resident. I'm going to be going back and forth with Ayana, who is our clean water advocate, and is going to be talking about our work a little bit. We're going to talk about environmental priorities as we go and we face this pandemic. And I did see, a question in the chat about the state legislature. Just the Illinois Environmental Council works on representing over 90 different affiliate organizations, including Center for Neighborhood Technology is one of our members, as well as the Edgewater Environmental Sustainability Project. And we represent those members and lobby on their behalf, track what's going on with all of these different government groups, both at the state level, county level, and the city level, and just make sure that we can get the best environmental legislation we can while growing our power to make the next things easier and easier. So I'm gonna pitch it off to Ayana, who is going to talk to you a little bit about what COVID's telling us about this crisis.
Thank you, Jen. Yeah, we're talking about what does COVID tell us about the environment. I personally think it almost tells us more about the people that are in the environment, right? So when we're talking about COVID, it's not just a public health crisis, it's an environmental and economic justice crisis. There are people disproportionately being impacted by this, and these are the same communities that are being burdened by racism, pollution, compromised immune systems, and other public health disparities. So when I talk about EJ communities, I'm really talking about communities that are typically low income and Black and brown communities that are in proximity to pollution. So they're located near industrial facilities, near freeways, near warehouses, and this isn't by chance. I'm sure folks have heard about redlining and related policies that have essentially put people right next to those polluting sites. At the same time, these are also the same communities that suffer disproportionately from health issues like asthma, diabetes, and cardiovascular disease. This complicates their cases of COVID-19 and also makes them more susceptible to die from COVID-19. And then finally, I want to talk about those who are employed in these communities, so the workers. A lot of times, these are workers that are working at warehouses, fast food, agriculture, security, transportation. These are all sectors where you can't really work from home. You don't have that flexibility. You also, there is no real opportunity for social distancing. And then finally, these are also things where they don't have the proper healthcare benefits. So when we're talking about COVID-19 and the environment, I just want folks to keep in the back of their mind, we're talking about saving, water and land and trees and different things, but also really think about those folks that are in the community that are being impacted by this.
Great, thanks, Ayana. And we're going on to our next slide here. I want to offer that IEC has a couple of resources to help you in addition to these items that we're going to go through. We've been doing a webinar series that ended today, actually, about different things that, different environmental issues during this time. And there is one on how to get outside safely. There's one on sustainability tips that you can do at home. You can find those all at youtube.com/ILEnviro. But I know Commissioner Bouquet covered some of the tips. Absolutely no flushing of wet wipes right now, or we're going to have some backed up pipes. I know that another issue that's been important to a number of people has been the reusable bags. The governor's executive order did not ban reusable bags from stores, but there are many stores that are not allowing them. But what we're suggesting to people, especially at this time, you don't want somebody touching something that you touched. And so we have some recommendation and guidance that we've been giving folks on either using the self-checkout lanes if you want to avoid a plastic bag, or putting the items in your cart and bagging them yourselves. Most grocery stores in the neighborhood are amenable to that proposal. So just keeping those things in mind, but just always being polite to these workers that are in high risk essential areas. So COVID is telling us a lot about the environment. And, I think that we look at this and, I know there are a lot of people who might say, why are you talking about climate change at this time when there's a pandemic going on? But this is the time to be talking about climate change because it's exacerbating the crisis. Not only have scientists predicted that climate change will increase the number of pandemics that are out there, but inclement weather could exacerbate the crisis as well. And we are seeing temporary benefits to air pollution that demonstrates what's possible. But the future that we need to have needs to have both a robust economy where people are working, where workers are protected, and also decreases in air pollution, increases to public health. Ayana spoke a little bit about some of the systemic issues around access to food, water, housing, and transportation. We're seeing real problems where we've already had problems with our food system in the way that so much of our food is being grown on big food mega farms, and the supply chain is breaking down. We are seeing a lot of groups that are urban agriculture and local food that are able to get more business from that, which is really great. But we need to be able to build up that supply chain to support food access. A final point here is that our safety net is under attack. right now, we're undergoing almost every week while this pandemic is going on, the Trump administration is rolling back environmental regulations. And so anything from the Waters of the United States rules to saying that environmental laws are not going to be enforced, all of that. But not only is it that way at the US EPA level, but our IEPA has been cut in half in terms of the number of employees in the last 10 years. This crisis is demonstrating now more than ever that we need these government in place to make sure that we can survive a crisis. This also includes the Department of Environment at the City of Chicago, which was removed under the previous mayor. So another issue that's really important that Ayanna is going to talk about as we move over to that slide is the access to utilities and water. So giving that to Ayanna.
Yeah, so I mean, within environmental justice communities, obviously deaths are being concentrated within EJ communities, but within those EJ communities, there are people who don't have access to water. And so without access to water, these shelter-in-place orders are actually increasing their threat, because without water, it makes their prevention efforts even more difficult or impossible. So when I think about this from a literal perspective, I think, how can you ask somebody to wash their hands for 20 seconds if they don't have running water? How can you ask somebody to mop the floor and sanitize the house if they don't have access to water? So it's more than just people not having drinking water. It's really talking about how not having access to water in general puts people at a greater risk. But then it also shows that there's people being denied a basic human need, which is just safe, affordable, and clean drinking water. And so there's a few things that need to happen to ensure that going forward, even not just now in the current situation, but going forward, that everybody has universal access to water. And so first, we need a permanent moratorium on water shutoffs, period. The governor has issued a water shutoff moratorium, and so has Mayor Lightfoot, but these aren't necessarily permanent. So we need something to be permanent for now and for the long term. We also need immediate access to water for those that don't have water. So when we're talking about this, we're also talking about reconnections. Like I said, they put a moratorium on disconnections, but if your water was turned off in January, it doesn't mean anything now that they put a moratorium on water shutoffs. You need water now. And we also need to include emergency water provisions. So people who don't have their water, they need to have bottled water. They also need to have water for bathing and hygiene. So in my mind, I'm thinking about, partnering with hotels and park districts and gyms and stadiums in order to provide showering facilities. And then finally, we need to think about the long-term water affordability strategy. And part of that is like a water bill assistance program. The city of Chicago has the utility bill relief program, but obviously the city of Chicago is not the only place where people can't afford their water. So we need something statewide. We also need rates to be restructured. So we need equitable water rates that are charging, so that people who are paying the most are not the people who have the least. And then finally, we need improvements to our aging water infrastructure. Making investments in water infrastructure will ensure that we have equitable water rates. Aging, inefficient, and leaking water pipes are not going to cause water to become less. It's not going to make water rates go down more. So if we don't invest in that water infrastructure, our water is going to continue to be more and more expensive. So with that being said, like when I think about COVID-19 and water access, we're not just talking about now in the place of the pandemic. We're talking about even going forward and making sure people have access to water so that things like this don't happen again.
And as we go into our last slide here, we are just going to provide some advocacy tips because we do need to keep going here on advocacy. And, somebody like I was getting to this point, the Illinois State Legislature cannot meet online. They have to meet in person. So we've written a whole slate of bills that we've put together with with Colleen Smith, myself, our legislative director. We put a whole number of bills together that we don't think any will go forward this year. But we are advocating in terms of what might end up in the budget, if there are any stimulus or other relief bills. Of course, trying to get the Clean Energy Jobs Act and clean energy on the front burner as these things move forward, because they have to meet in person to move things forward. The city council, of course, has been meeting online, but this is still time where we need to make sure that environmental priorities are put forward. We just need to do it in the right way. And I hesitate at all sometimes to bring up environmental issues right now when we see that there are, in the country, literally over 60,000 people dying from all of this. It's hard to think about the environment and some of this. But I see industry asking for everything under the sun right now. They want to weaken environmental oversight, and they want to roll things back. So we can and we should be advocating for the environment right now. We also should be advocating for essential workers. We should be advocating for those folks that are in labor to make sure that they have great conditions. So using our voice on those is the best way to use our environmental voice right now. And this response is going to help us figure out how we deal with the climate crisis, which is similar in magnitude and similar in terms of being a public health crisis. So that is a little more about the Illinois Environmental Council, what we see ahead. And our next speaker is Rebecca Rains from the Center for Neighborhood Technology, who is going to speak. So thank you.
Hello, thank you for having me here. You can go to the next slide. I'm going to do a little bit of a diversion from what we normally do at the Center for Neighborhood Technology. We're usually a data hub. A lot of our time kind of supporting things with analytics and data. And today I'm going to talk that's really not analytical or data based at all. It is an observation that I've had over a lifetime. And I'm really glad that CNT has given me a platform to kind of bring out a point of view that I have in regards to food deserts and food access and how it's kind of affected the Black community in particular during this COVID crisis. And so I want to just start off by saying that a food desert is commonly defined as a neighborhood or area, a home that is more than a mile away from service grocery store. And you can kind of term it in a lot of ways. If you go into Google, it'll claim a lot of things as grocery stores. Like if they sell any kind of food, it's kind of considered a grocery store. Dollar Tree, for one, is often termed that. They've been allowed to stay open during this time period because they're considered an essential service because they do have a lot of food, but the food that they have there is not necessarily healthy. It's my place where I used to go before I go to the movies to get some candy for cheap. So it's not necessarily a healthy place to get food. And so as we dug deeper into this crisis of COVID, then I think about a month or so of us being into it, we went through a lot of ideas about Black people couldn't get it, and a lot of things about our understanding. We weren't necessarily sheltering in place. As Ayanna already brought out, a lot of us being essential workers, having to use public transportation, not being able to shelter in place, not having internet at home. All of those things kind of force us to be out and about, and our death toll raised up to about 70%. But one of the things that's not as commonly talked about as we have these discussions is that there are a lot of underlying conditions, health conditions, that are causing, we believe, are causing some people to suffer more from COVID. And I believe that those health conditions are deeply related to our diets. And while there's a lot of cultural and issues within the Black community about why our diets are so, in this age of information, we can't completely blame on someone else, but we can also say that there is some structural racism that has come down to create food deserts in many of our communities. And so in the blog that I wrote for CNT, I started off by saying that I am a Black female millennial. I am generally considered to be middle class. And I've lived in very middle class to upper middle class suburbs. And now I live in a low income neighborhood on the west side of Chicago. And in both of those places, I lived in a food desert. I had to travel usually 3 miles or more in order to get to food, and certainly to get to any kind of healthy food. I definitely have an affinity for kale, organic kale, and it's not easy to find it everywhere. And so I wanted to kind of discuss some of the reasons of how that costs us more money, not only in actual cash, but it costs us in our healthcare expenses. It costs us in our health and has cost us our lives. Next slide. So with that being understood, I, as a person who I love my bike, and I started riding a bike about 10 years ago. For a little while, I was without a job and without a car. My car was stolen. And so those two things happening at the same time, I got very familiar with my bike and had to depend on it as my only transportation back and forth to the grocery stores that had closed down in my neighborhood. And so as I was looking for even a smaller store, like a discount store, like an Aldi, where I could get most of my basic needs, there are no bike racks. There's no place for me to put a bike for me to do my grocery shopping. I'm not really a big fan of exercising, so I use my bike not only as my way of lessening my carbon footprint, but also of me getting in my daily exercise for the day. But as I make that decision, there's nowhere to put my bike. As I decide if I want a store, I can't do a mass amount of shopping while I'm at a grocery store on foot. Can't carry all of that stuff back. I've seen a lot of little old ladies, they have their carts. As we look into this pandemic and we think about, oh, we can just get on public transportation, at least in my neighborhood, public transportation stops at the limits of the city. And I have to go past the limits of my city to get to those organic kales that I'm looking for. That means I would have to catch 2 buses. Now I live in a very transit rich neighborhood, which means that I have great CTA access within walking distance of everywhere in every direction, but I have to get on numerous bus lines and modes of transportation, which heightens my exposure. Also, as we're talking about COVID times, and those little old ladies who are doing it used to be able to depend on other people to help them with their carts, to get on and off of buses or L lines. A gentleman to come and help them take their cart down, their individual carts down from the bus. And now in these times, nobody will help anyone. No one's lending a hand because we don't want to touch things. And then finally, this is not a personal issue of mine because I now do have a car, but many don't have a car. They don't have the ability to just say, well, I'll just hop in my car and make this trip. I'll do it in mass. I'll bring everything back in order to get the things that I need. And it kind of puts people in a predicament of not only do I not have what I need, but I don't have a way to get what I need. And I'm kind of depending on friends or getting on that mass transit and getting to where I need to go in order to get to my essential needs. Next slide. And so I say that to say, as we look at to our grocery stores and things that we need, we have to consider, are the mechanisms even set up for people to be able to get themselves back and forth if they don't have a car, if they're scared to get on the bus or the L, and they still need to get to their food and they can't get to it easily because it's not in their neighborhood. And the last thing that I have to say about this whole thing is that there is a cost to the integration. And so way back when, our ancestors fought really hard for us to be able to shop anywhere we wanted to. And the consequence of the integration and being able to shop wherever was that many retailers and stores just decided that they would no longer locate into our neighborhoods. They were forcing us to go into the suburb next door or a more affluent town somewhere else that usually is not a Black or brown populated neighborhood, and say, well, you can do all of your shopping. We'll put 3 or 4 grocery stores over here. You can do all of your shopping here, but we won't locate actually where you live. And that is not integration, but that is assimilation. Assimilation means that we're going to force you to come to us rather than us having a fair trade, equal trading access of goods back and forth. And so it is these factors that have contributed to make food access an issue, an even greater issue as we're living in a COVID time where we're scared to be out. We don't want to, we want to be able to shelter in place as we've been told, but we don't necessarily have that ability because we have to go so much further and such a greater distance in order to get to those essential things that we need. I thank you for listening to me. And I'm open for any questions that anyone will have via the chat. I'll turn it back over to Renee.
Hi, everyone. My name is Renee. I am one of the co-chairs of the Edgewater Environmental Sustainability Project. I'm excited to have this opportunity to talk with you all today. So with our organization, we've been having conversations about the impact of our current dual crises, both climate and COVID. We recently joined the 47th Ward Green Council and the city in our own declaration of climate emergency. And we've been working and we've been doing a lot of the work required for that for the last 10 years. And with that declaration, we now have an added sense of urgency and a call to action. Some of the matters that we care about the most are the same topics that we're going to have in our breakouts in a bit. Those breakout topics actually came out of conversations that our membership had about COVID, the environment, and climate at our last meeting. Our main takeaway from that and from Earth Day last week was that we really need local and regional preparedness and community resilience, and that we all need to have that together. So at EESP, we focus on the ground actions and legislative issues, advocacy for sustainable transportation and energy, waste reduction, ecology, biodiversity, our green oasis. So currently we have a campaign for a litter-free Edgewater that we kicked off during Earth Week. This effort goes beyond just people picking up litter on the block. That is happening, but it's also collective community action. We invite all Edgewater residents and businesses to join us. More information is at our website. Other ways we are engaging this spring is with some free vegetable distribution to other Edgewater nonprofits and native planting education through street planters on Clark and Andersonville, which I'm personally very excited about. Those are just two of the items that we're going to be doing this, that we have going on this spring. So I hope that you'll join us in the breakouts to continue the conversation on these topics. The world we need will not be possible unless people like us come together in conversation. And that's why we're having these breakouts. So I hope that if you live or work in Edgewater or the 48th or 40th Ward, that you'll reach out and learn more and connect with EESP. And just one housekeeping note on the breakouts. If you happen to join with a name that was not on your RSVP, I do not know what breakout to put you in. So you might be randomly assigned, just a housekeeping note on that. But with that, I now turn it over to Michael to speak next.
Thank you, Renee. And thank you so much to our elected officials, IEC and CNT for informing us about what's going on and really putting things in perspective as well, I think. So as I mentioned at the top of the meeting, I work in the 47th Ward office with Alderman Martin, and one of the parts of my job is helping with the 47th Ward Green Council and with environmental policy and action. And it's really been incredible because I think in the 47th Ward, along with in Edgewater, we've got a lot of residents who care deeply about these issues and who have experience working on these issues for decades. So the 47th Ward Green Council is something that Alderman Pawar also had before we were in office, and it largely served as an advisory board or group of residents who were interested in these issues, trying to push certain policies through this office and for not only the ward, but also through city council for citywide initiatives. And I think we've really looked to continue that, but also open it up even more broadly to residents, not just in the 47th Ward, but throughout the city. And we've had folks from all over coming to attend some of our meetings. So I think we've spent it's been just about a year since we've gotten into office. And I think in many ways we've been learning ourselves what the Green Council is and what it can be. I'd say generally we've got a core group of folks who tend to be professionals who work in environmental related jobs or have been community organizers and activists with decades of work on these issues. And they bring that experience and that expertise into advising us on different policies that we should be considering. And then in addition to that, we've started doing and have changed up, of course, given the circumstances, some monthly educational meetings. So we can try and meet folks where they're at. If you are just a novice, you're enthused, you know that we need some change but aren't quite sure where to start. Hopefully you can get connected with people who are attending these meetings, learn a little bit about the different issues that are being worked on throughout the city and the region, and then learn a little bit about how you can plug in and take action. And I think, you know, one thing that was really heartening and reassuring was when Jules and others on the group really took the initiative to say we need to declare a climate emergency, and we want to ask the aldermen to do the same. And they've come to us as well with other policies that we want to be considering at the city level. So what we've done with the monthly meetings, we've had different topics. We've had Extinction Rebellion come in, and that was the night that the Green Council officially on their own declared that that climate emergency, which ultimately went through City Council. We've had folks from the Chicago Regional Trees Initiative to talk about how we can expand our tree canopy, but also maintain and protect the existing canopy that we have here. We had a group of ward residents mostly organizing with Plastics Alternatives lead a wonderful session just last month. And I'm excited to see some of these continue, and hope to be talking with them soon about how we adapt here as we're isolated, to think about what kind of virtual events we can bring to you through the Green Council. So if you're interested in getting involved, it's open to anyone. It really is, you can get out of it what you want to put in. There's no specific time commitment, but if you're interested in researching policy to help educate our office on what things we should be pushing on, that's certainly an area where we can use help. If you're interested in organizing one of our monthly meetings, that's certainly something that we want to support. We've had residents who, for instance, wanted to organize a series of nature walks in the ward at different areas, and that's something as well that we want to support. So I think hopefully we can continue some of this momentum we've seen through the very active and educated residents that we have on these issues, lending their expertise and their enthusiasm. And if you do want to get involved, you can go to our website, aldermanmartin.com, or you can email me at michael@aldermanmartin.com. And I'm just hoping that we'll continue this during this this different time that we're in, and I'm excited to see what more ideas the folks in the 47th Ward come up with.
Thanks so much, Michael. And then this is Colleen from the Illinois Environmental Council. Thanks, Jason. As Jen said, I'm the legislative director. I hope that so far people have really learned a lot. I always find it great when we can bring together city, county, state voices, because there is so much happening at every level of government. I'm proud to be a part of that at IEC, but also to support the work that people like Michael and Renee are doing at the hyper-local level. I don't think Jen mentioned that she's a part of EESP, and I am an honorary 47th Ward Green Council member. So we're going to dive into some Q&A. We had a lot of questions that people submitted previously when they RSVP'd, and then we'll try and get to some of the ones in the chat. And again, if you don't feel like your question was answered, please email info@alderman.Matt.Martin or IEC@IL Enviro, and we can be sure to address your questions after the fact. So starting with all the issue areas, let's go to clean energy, because we're in a time where we have this respiratory pandemic, and what could be more important than making sure that we have clean air and an equitable clean energy future. So I would love it if Anne and maybe Jen could talk a little bit about the Clean Energy Jobs Act. What's the status? What's happening with the state? And then Alderman Martin and Alderman Vasquez, if you could touch on clean energy priorities for the city, obviously the declaration that you passed, but also a lot of interest in what's happening with the ComEd franchise agreement and the role that that plays in our clean energy future. So I'll maybe kick it over to Anne first, and if folks who are watching can just put your computers on speaker view, that'll be great.
I'm ready to go, I think.
Great. Go for it, Anne.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Colleen. And before I want to get into any details on the Clean Energy Jobs Act, or as we all call it, CEJA, I just wanted to make a note that the impetus and really the momentum behind the success we have been seeing with bills like CEJA and CEJA itself is due to the grassroots support the bill has. Jen and Colleen have heard me say this 1,000 times, but 10, 20 years ago, the environmental advocacy energy around Springfield was, we were lucky to get in the room for a conversation. We were hoping to get a seat at the table when it came to big issues like this. And now the tables really have turned. And thanks to the work of organizations like the IEC, groups like Sierra Club, of course, the neighborhood, I'm sorry, Renee, your name, technology, Center for Neighborhood Technology, and other organizations have really upped the conversation. And my colleagues want to be a part of advancing Illinois' green economy. They are excited about it. And that's because they hear from their constituents on issues, not just big global issues like climate change, but very local issues like what's happening with General Iron or some of the asphalt plants in other parts of the city and everything else, the issue in Pilsen. So these working together have really buoyed our efforts to pass CEJA. That being said, I saw a few questions about why the General Assembly isn't meeting remotely. I can assure you we are working quite hard, even though we're not in Springfield actually voting on bills. The pace of the legislative session is such that it starts in January and many considered, and at the end of the day, at the end of May, we have legislative agendas that we have fully passed and the governor will sign. But what has happened here is due to the pandemic, we have put many of the non-urgent and non-emergency issues on hold for now. So it doesn't mean we're not working on them. It just means we're not voting on them at this time. There is a prohibition in the Constitution that would preclude Illinois from meeting remotely. In order to change the Constitution, you have to have a ballot initiative to allow that. There might be opportunities to find a legal way around it. But in order to vote for anything to change, we would have to be there in person, which we can't do because of the prohibitions that are in place in Illinois right now. So I do want to assure the activists on the call that we are proceeding with conversations regarding CEJA. The messaging is a little bit different, and it does really tie in with the conversations about the pandemic. You can't talk about climate issues without talking about the growth of infectious disease, as we've all unfortunately had to learn lately. So CEJA is alive and well. I think actually some of the recent issues may help increase the support for CEJA as people realize the impacts that we have from not passing a clean energy package. I want to thank the Alderman as well as the 47th Ward Green Council, as well as the folks in Edgewater for passing your initiatives declaring a climate emergency. That is just another, weapon that we can use in this incredible fight for passing CEJA on the state level and hopefully getting action in many states and eventually on the federal level on this issue.
Thanks, Anne.
Long answer.
And it looks like Alderman Martin may want to answer that. And then, after clean energy, we can get into some transportation and maybe waste issues. But Alderman Martin and Alderman Vasquez, if you want to talk more about what the city is doing.
Sure.
Yeah, you go ahead, Andre. You got it.
No, after you, it's all good.
Okay. So I think that there are a few things that are already on our radar. One being a resolution that we'd introduced calling for hearings on our dismal recycling and composting rates. We know that there is a study that's underway by the Department of Streets and Sanitation to look into the recycling component. Also, the city's inspector general is going to be preparing a report. I think it's really incumbent upon city council to make sure we're ready to hold folks' feet to the fire, because we've known for years that this is really terrible, and we know what a lot of those next steps are. Another big one is expanding our tree canopy. I think there are ways, whether it's making sure that we're using some menu money on that to the extent that makes sense in particular wards, or partnering with other organizations to make sure that we're planting more often, because that helps both reduce flooding as well as reduce the heat island effect. And then finally is making sure that with the next budget coming up, that we're fighting for the reintroduction of the Department of the Environment. There are a number of folks in the 47th and 40th wards that are really active on this issue, some of whom have worked in the prior iteration of the Department of the Environment. So I think that's a common sense thing when we know, as so many of the speakers have identified, the fact that we've got this huge crisis, but also a huge opportunity to reshift the way that we're talking about environmental issues and making sure that we're investing in the green economy. And I view a new robust Department of the Environment as critical of that.
Yeah, I would definitely echo Alderman Martin's comments, especially as it pertains to what, unfortunately, some people in the council were joking as the cubicle of the environment, because it's actually not a fully fleshed out office. So we do need more budgeting as it pertains to that. I know we looked into our menu to catch up. You know, when we had taken office, there was a backlog of about 2 to 3 years of trees that needed to get planted. So we definitely use a lot of our menu fund to kind of help build that up as well. 2 other things that kind of we think about. One, as you mentioned earlier, was ComEd, is looking at the fact that those agreements are coming up. And so, you know, I'm a proponent of the Democratized ComEd campaign. So, you know, the easiest way that I can explain this to folks is it's the reverse of the parking meter deal. It's kind of how I view it, right? Like when we looked at that, the parking meter deal was a public utility parking that we sold to private entities who then made profit for up to 62 more years, I think. To look at it in the opposite manner, to see a utility that clearly is making enough profit margins to continue their business, find a way to municipalize that so we can come up with better solutions, savings, and potentially have more revenue for the city, I think is worth looking at. And another thing that struck me, and this was definitely COVID brought it out, was what happened with Hilco over in Pilsen. I think looking at the processes that the departments have in order to let something like that go through, it needs to be looked at further, as well as the fact that, to my understanding, there were people who were city workers that were there at the moment it occurred, and there was nothing in place to kind of put the stop on it because there wasn't measures to suppress some of the particulate matter. So I think we've got to look at, you know, the large ones, but also things like that show an opportunity of how we can be better as government to get solutions that actually protect us. Because, you know, especially in a situation with COVID out there, when we're talking about a disease that affects your respiratory health, the fact that there is particulate matter of any sort flying in the air is unacceptable. And I think we've got to look to see how we can get better results.
Thanks, Alderman. That definitely goes a bit to, you know, obviously the need for greater resources at the city. As Jen mentioned, our safety net at the state and the decimation of the Illinois EPA is hugely problematic. The county has actually a great environmental office, but you know, we need more support to protect the public health and protect communities. Another series of questions that we got, there was a lot of interest in what's going on with bike and walk infrastructure, public transportation, and electric vehicles. As again, we talk about clean air and our future, it's really important that we electrify the transportation sector while providing safe, accessible bike and walk infrastructure. IEC was part of a partnership with Active Transportation Alliance to get some money in the capital budget last year for a dedicated bike and walk fund from the state. I know that effort's happening at the city level. I know Alderman Martin just helped pass the EV Ready Ordinance. And I know there's some work being done at the county. So, and Rebecca touched on this as well. So a little bit of a free-for-all here, but would love to get some feedback from our experts about what is happening with electrifying our transportation sector right now.
Do you want me to maybe kick this off, Colleen, and then
that'd be great, Jen.
Yeah, sure. So Jen Welling from IEC. You know, within the Clean Energy Jobs Act, there are a great number of components on the electrification of the transportation sector. And, you know, when we electrify vehicles, you know, they are going off of our current grid, which has dirty energy attached to it. But, you know, if you think about a gas powered or diesel powered vehicle, every day that they are driven on the road, they get dirtier. But every day an electric vehicle is on the road, it gets cleaner because our electricity system is getting cleaner and cleaner all the time. So at the state level, we're working on some VW settlement funds. And so the VW settlement is because VW lied about its emissions testing. And so then VW will have to pay into each state. We're getting about 108 million in Illinois. Unfortunately, the Rauner administration wrote the VW settlement plan, and we tried as hard as we could to get as much electrification in there as possible, but they mostly wanted to give the money to railroad switching and Metra and that sort of thing. And so we have one of the most fossil fuel heavy VW settlement plans in the country. So we're working with the Pritzker administration and the new IEPA to get this written to focus on electrification. And there is a portion up to 10% can be used on electric vehicle charging, but also there is a number of things for public transit and also school buses, as well as $70 million that was in the state capital plan on electric vehicle and charging infrastructure. So I hope that those efforts become unsiloed and like really help develop this whole network. But for me, my focus, the thing I'm most excited about is the electrification of the city of Chicago buses. You know, we don't have as many school buses running in the city because kids are generally walking, taking public transit to school or live close to schools if they're public schools. So focusing on city buses, and we have a goal to do that. And Colleen just told me she lost internet. So does anybody from the city want to add on to that? What are we doing with electrification?
Yeah, so it's something that I brought up with CDOT Commissioner Gia Biaggi recently, and so it's on their radar. I think what we need to do is at least two things. One is make sure that we're continuing to agitate and reminding folks that like this is an issue that isn't going away, and the idea that folks are continuing to look at it is a line that like might work at the outset of our 4-year term collectively, but isn't going to work a year or two after we start. And second is I think that there's a lot of compelling information showing that over the multiple year life of buses, that actually investing early on in an electric bus is more cost efficient because even though the upfront cost is higher, when you factor in the cost of gasoline over, I think is an approximate 10-year useful life of a bus, that a diesel powered bus is more expensive. So one of the challenges, but also opportunities right now is given the financial problems that we're having exacerbated by COVID, we can say, look, it's all the more important that we view this as an opportunity to make smart upfront investments that will pay dividends down the road.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And Jen,
go
from
ahead.
a county perspective, you know, I think there's a twofold question there. The first one is, how do we electrify our own fleet? So we can manage what we control, which is we spend the money on the way that we look at the sheriff's office in their cars, the forest preserve in their cars. And so the first question is, when you put out your request for proposal and you're doing a procurement, why are you not putting that procurement across, including in that procurement language that says, I want to know how much an electric fleet would cost as well? So those are the questions that need to be asked. Like, what does the language in the request for procurement say? And I want you to include in that request for procurement language that includes electrifying our fleet. And then make those expectations moved out over 10 years. So maybe the sheriff's office, and they have patrol cars that need different engines that go a lot faster for high-speed chases. You know, those cars can be electric last. The technology is already there in order for the cars at the Forest Preserve and their police. I mean, they're not chasing anybody, and their Forest Preserve police and the Forest Preserve conservation folks go from Forest Preserve to Forest Preserve. And there is a way to make sure that there's electronic docking stations that those are incorporated. And so that over the course of my 4-year term or longer, that we are building out the infrastructure for our own fleet to be electrified, and then moving towards making sure that we have our own forest preserve or county areas that have the charging stations that are available for people who have electric fleet or electric cars to charge on our own property. So those are the things that we're looking at to make sure that we're pushing those out in connection with our Cook County Department of the Environment.
Great, thanks. Anybody else want to add anything electrification there? Cool. Yeah. And I think I saw a question about, exhaust emissions, and that's something we're working on. It's tough with, police vehicle idling, but I know there are certain laws on idling in front of schools that exist but could be improved. So definitely an issue to bring up. So I saw, oh, sorry, did you want to go ahead?
Yeah,
Alderman? Go ahead.
Yeah, not exactly for electrification, but really in talking about transportation, something that we had been thinking about, and it's actually been an internal debate because of the moment we're in, was there is an opportunity to talk about pedestrianization of streets. Mm-hmm. Now that we're looking at where most folks aren't driving. The concern is really if you start doing that you don't create an attraction to actually draw more people into an area. But I think, when looking at other countries, like in Barcelona, they've got whole blocks that are all pedestrianized, that I think we should start looking at that, knowing that 20, 30 years from now, we won't be relying on vehicles the same way we do currently.
I know there were a lot of questions in the chat box about biking as well. So just lots of good chatting in the chat box. I think it's time that we move over to breakouts. So thanks everybody for all the questions that you had. There's some really good ones that we didn't get to that, if you need to, iec@islandbiro.org is our email address, and we'll provide other contact info as well. So I'm going to pass it off to Michael, who is then going to move us into breakouts.
Thank you, Jen. Yeah, and thank you so much to, again, all of our guests who joined us to walk us through the issues that we're facing now and the issues that we need to tackle, not just in the future, but really need to be talking about and acting on now. I really appreciate everyone who took the time to join us tonight. And I hope that you will continue to get involved, whether it's with an organization throughout the city, one of the member organizations of IEC, or in your neighborhood, the Edgewater Environmental Sustainability Project, the 47th Ward Green Council, or if you're elsewhere in the city trying to start your own Green Council or Sustainability Project group and really push things forward on a hyper-local basis as well, because I think that we've seen grassroots action really be effective in this realm here. So if there was any information that someone mentioned that you'd be interested in learning more about, don't hesitate to reach out to us again. I know we've put some emails in the chat box, so certainly reach out to us and send your questions and ask how you can get involved, what actions you can take. And I'm excited now that we'll be moving into the different group breakouts that you signed up for to talk about different issues like open space, like community gardens and the importance of local food, and local organizing and waste. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us, and let's continue this discussion as we go over into the breakouts.